Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of Vibe with Venerables. 1 hour of live Dharma and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a great Venerable. I'm Ming, co-founder of Buddhism.net and your host. Now, today's episode is a very special Vesak Day episode with a very special Venerable, Bhante Shravasti Dhammika. So I've been a fan of Bhante Dhammika since I was a teenager, which is about 10 years ago. No, many years ago. Bhante was born in Australia in 1951, became a Buddhist at the age of 18, and then ordained as a monk in 1976. He was co-founder of the Nilambe Meditation Center in Sri Lanka and a spiritual advisor to the Buddha Dharma Mandala Society in Singapore. He's the author of over 25 books, and I read at least 7 of them. His book, Praised by the Wise, is available for free on Buddhism.net, and his latest book is this one, Footprints in the Dust, the life of the Buddha from the most ancient sources. So today, Bhante is here to teach us about the other mindfulness, which is Anussati, which literally means along with memory. So Bhante will speak for roughly 25 minutes and then answer your questions live. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube later.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for joining. And before we do, maybe we'll just give a few brief thoughts to how fortunate we are to be able to meet together, perhaps from all over the world, due to modern technology. And that in our particular case, at this time, we're using that technology to explore and share the Dhamma. And that this gives us a real blessing, because previously you might have to buy a book, or at the time of the Buddha, you may have to go for a long journey to hear or to meet somebody who could share the Dhamma with you. But because of this modern technology, we have the ability to share the Dhamma with others, despite the fact that they may be a long way away, and that this is a wonderful blessing that the modern world and modern technology imparts to us, and we're very fortunate for that, and let us be joyful because of that. Today I'd like to talk about something called Anussati, which is a type of meditation taught by the Buddha quite a lot, actually. And it's always, I've always noticed that nowadays, for some reason, it's all about Vipassana and mindfulness. Not that there's anything wrong with that, on the contrary. However, I think it may lead some people to think that that's it. That's all the Buddha had to offer when it comes to meditation. And if that was so, then we would miss out on a great deal, because the Buddha actually taught at least 15 or 20 different types of meditation. And the one I'm going to talk about today is called the Anussatis. And I've called this the other mindfulness, or the other sati, and for good reason. If you actually look in the Buddha's discourses, a definition of sati, mindfulness, is given very frequently. But it's quite an unusual one. When the suttas talk about and describe briefly the various steps on the Noble Eightfold Path, when it comes to samādhīyati, right mindfulness, it always says he remembers and turns over in his mind things done and said long ago. In fact, throughout the whole of the Tipitaka, that is the only definition of sati. And that doesn't sound very much like what most people think mindfulness or sati is. We think of it as a detached observation of what's going on in the mind. Whereas this definition seems to be talking about remembering things. How is this? Well, the general understanding is the word sati, or in Sanskrit smriti, prior to Buddhism meant exactly that. It meant to remember or to recollect. And when the Buddha is talking about the Anussatis, he's not talking about being mindful again. He is talking about remembering, calling to mind, or contemplating something. Hence, anu meaning perhaps again, and sati, remember, to remember again. And throughout the suttas, there are a good deal of discourses on this particular type of meditation. One that immediately comes to mind is a series of talks he gave to a member of his family, Mahānāma, and another one to the noble woman Visakha. But the Anussatis are referred to quite a few other times. And the classical satis or Anussatis are these: the Buddhānussati, the Dhammānussati, and Saṅghānussati, recollecting or calling to mind the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But then there are other ones as too. There's Silānussati, remembering or calling to mind virtue. Now in the suttas it usually says one's own virtue. But I think it's not a stretch to say that we could recollect and call to mind our own virtues, our own good qualities, and those of others as well. Then there is Cāgânussati, recollection on sharing. People know the word more frequently, or the quality more frequently, as dana. Dana means, I would say, generosity. Cāga would be sharing. So once again, calling to mind, thinking about, recollecting on the times that we've been generous, or perhaps when people have been generous to us. Then there's Devatânussati, recollecting the devas. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Then there's Upasamānussati, which means recollecting peace. I'll come back to that one in a minute too. And then there's the Maraṇānussati, recollecting death. Okay, so they're the main recollections that the Buddha taught. And now I'm just going to return to the Devatânussati, recollecting or calling to mind, thinking about the devas, what they did to be reborn in that realm, what their powers are, what their experiences are, and so on. Now, I think that probably, at least amongst Western Buddhists, or those interested in Buddhism, this is a little bit remote for us. I suspect that nowadays, at least people who are interested in Buddhism, most of them probably would be skeptical even about the idea of a single supreme God, and probably the idea of many gods, Indra and Varuna and Soma and Sakka and what have you, is probably, we probably wouldn't respond to it the same way, say, in traditional Buddhist countries or at the time of the Buddha. So what I think might be a bad idea would be to look at everything the Buddha has to say about the Anussatis. And when we do, we discover sometimes the Buddha talked about other Anussatis, which very rarely do get mentioned. And one that I think is very interesting is called Kalyāṇamittatānusatti, recollecting good friends or spiritual friends. And for those who read the suttas and that, this is mentioned at the Anguttara Nikaya 5.336, or if you have a copy of Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the Anguttara Nikaya, if you went to page 1571, you'll find it there, recollecting the the blessing it is to have good friends, or perhaps that you're being a good friend or a spiritual friend to others. So just to recap, recollecting on the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dhamma, Sangha, recollecting on one's own and others' generosity, recollecting on one's own and others' virtues, strong points, recollecting the blessing of having or of being a good friend or a spiritual friend to others, recollecting on peace, internal, in your community, in your country, in the world, and recollecting on death. Okay, so in the case of the three jewels, this can, every now and then, thinking about what the Buddha did for us, why he's important in our life, recollecting the hardships and the difficulties he endured in order to teach the Dhamma to us. And in my new book, if you read it, I mention how many long journeys the Buddha took. If you go to India today, going on a long journey is a tremendous hassle, even today. Okay, what was it like in those days? And then when you remember that the Buddha and most of his monastic disciples were sedentary for 3 months of the year during the rainy season when it's relatively cool, and that they only wandered or wayfared during the rest of the year, well, one half of the rest of the year would have been in the summer. So the Buddha must have walked on the dusty paths of India in the summer. And why did he do that? Well, he tells us he did it out of compassion for the good, the welfare, and the happiness of gods and humans. I think that's worth recollecting. Then there's recollecting the Dhamma, its clarity, its consistency, the parts of it that challenge us, the parts of it that reinforce the good qualities in that which we already accept, or that give a new perspective on some of the virtues and the good qualities that we think about. Okay, and then recollecting on the Sangha. Now, normally today, the Sangha is thought of as the monastic community. It is occasionally understood like that in the suttas, but for the most part, the Sangha refers to the Arya Sangha. That is, those who have attained at least the first stage of leading to enlightenment, or second or third, or enlightenment itself. Now, there's a little bit of a problem here. Unfortunately, when you attain the first stage of enlightenment, you don't get a badge. You know? Now, there are people who claim to have done that, and of course, it certainly is possible, but I think we have to be a bit cautious, at least make some inquiries when we hear that somebody is saying that, or that others are saying that about somebody. But even if, so there's a bit of a problem there. However, we might be able to expand the meaning of recollecting the Sangha or taking refuge in the Sangha. We might be able to expand the meaning of it and readjust it a little bit for the present realities and say anybody, enlightened or not, monastic or not, who perhaps knows or embodies the Dhamma better than we do, and that we should admire them and perhaps open ourselves up to learning from them. So perhaps we could understand it like that today. In the case of Silānussati, I think that this is very important. In some approaches to Buddhism, it seems to be that the emphasis is very often on the negative. So I've joined discussion groups from time to time, and everybody's really quite open and even anxious to talk about their failings, their moral failings. I've still got a lot of loba, moha, and dosa. I'm struggling with greed or whatever. That's good. But an overemphasis upon the struggles, the failures, the challenges might sort of dampen our enthusiasm sometimes. And I think that it is often the case that we do something wholesome and worthwhile, but we dismiss it as not important. And perhaps from one perspective, it isn't important. But certainly it can be good to every now and then stop and consider, what did I do today that benefited another? You don't have to be Mother Teresa, just a kind word to somebody, or just slightly going out of your way for somebody, or else it might be something more dramatic and significant than that. But not dismissing such things as of no consequence. It can inspire you to do that more often. It may make a difference to others. My feeling is that sometimes is that you get the feeling that just general courtesy and thoughtfulness to others is not always given the attention that it should. Hopefully, somebody who's taking the Dhamma seriously should consider it. And every now and then, sitting down and recollecting the good that you have done in the general process of living can fill you with inspiration, enthusiasm, and joy. And thinking about what others have done for you. That can give rise to gratitude. It can strengthen friendships. In the case of, say, parents, for example, sometimes we forget how much they have done for us. And sometimes it mightn't be a bad idea to recollect that and then perhaps go out of the way and say, oh, and incidentally, Mum, thank you for doing this for me, or thank you for that, or I really appreciate that time when, etc., whatever. That can be a very wholesome thing to do. Then Kalyāṇamittatānusatti. Probably most people know the famous incident when Ananda said to the Buddha, I think that to have a Kalyāṇamitta, a noble friend or a spiritual friend or a good friend, I think that to have a Kalyāṇamitta is half the spiritual life. And the Buddha said, and corrected him, say not so, Ananda, say not so. It's not half the spiritual life, it's the whole of the spiritual life. I think the Buddha there was saying that ultimately each individual has to take responsibility for themselves. You are responsible for yourself. You walk the path, the Noble Eightfold Path by yourself. But that statement by the Buddha indicates to us that yes, that is true, but still you can't do it in a vacuum, alone, isolated from or uninfluenced by others. And the people that we come into contact with, particularly within a Buddhist context, can make a great difference to our spiritual journey. Myself, nowadays, now that I'm a bit older, no, that's not true. Now that I'm much older, I often, very often, think about the people who've helped me on my spiritual path. Two in particular. And both of them have passed away now, but when I think about them, it really fills me with a great deal of joy that I had the great blessing to meet just the right type of people at the right time. And of course, there are many others that have helped little bits here, there, and everywhere, have pointed me in a particular direction, or resolved a problem for me, or put an arm over my shoulder when I was down. And recollecting that, I think, can be very, very good for you. Now, also, I know that in my case, because of my position as a monk and for a long time as a teacher, I know that I've been able to be a Kalyāṇamitta to others. Every now and then people mention that to me. Not everybody, but they do mention that to me. And it gives me a great deal of joy. And joy is a good thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the recollection on peace. I think that the best way to do this is to reflect or recollect on those moments when you have had some internal or perhaps external peace in your life, particularly psychologically, particularly in meditation. My experience has been that people who do a meditation course, perhaps a 10-day meditation course, and perhaps for the first time they experience a glimpse, maybe a short glimpse of a deep inner peace. And that as a result of this, it turns them towards taking meditation and the spiritual life more seriously. And that's a good thing. So I see the recollection on peace as having that value. And then finally, Maraṇānussati, the recollection on death. This is a thing that a lot of people really don't want to think about. And for the most part, I think it's not necessary to be thinking about your own demise all of the time. But sometimes it can be very good. It can be very good. When you're overwhelmed by problems or whatever, and you think, one day I won't be here. This can help you get things in perspective, particularly if your problem is caused by another person. It can help you put your feet on the ground. The reality is you are here now. You won't be here forever. Use your time well. And this was a contemplation expanded by the Buddha in several of his other talks. One of them where he says it's a really rare opportunity to be reborn as a human being. But I think we can take that further. We can say it's a rare opportunity to be born in a world that is at peace, which happens to be the case in myself. I'm living in a country which is at peace. Then I think, okay, there are countries that are not involved in conflicts, but your freedoms are quite restricted. I live in a country where that is not the case. So thinking about that can once again give you a better appreciation and keep your feet on the ground. Okay, now, so these are the recollections taught by the Buddha, and he has a lot to say about why one should do this. And I'll just read out a few that I came across while preparing for this talk. He says that if you do these, or doing these recollections, allows you to live steady amongst the unsteady, without hostility amongst the hostile. That was one that I thought was very nice. Another one was that he compares doing the recollections twice a month during the Upasamānussati, the full moon and the half moon of each month. Of course, you don't have to do it on the full moon or the half moon, but let's say twice a month, every second week, is like purifying gold, taking the impurities out of gold. And he gives quite a detailed account of how gold is purified, bit by bit, heating it and then gradually removing impurities. And in another one, he says it's sort of equivalent to, it's like cleansing the mind, which is equivalent to daily having a bath, cleansing the body. And there's another one which I think is even more significant. It's a little bit long, so I'll read it. And I'm reading it from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And he says, doing the recollections, on that occasion, one's mind is not obsessed with greed, hatred, or delusion. On that occasion, his mind is simple, straight, and based on those recollections. A noble disciple whose mind is straight gains inspiration in the meaning, gains inspiration in the Dhamma, gains joy connected to the Dhamma. And when one is joyful, rapture arises. From one who is rapturous, the mind and the body become tranquil. And one tranquil in body feels pleasure. Actually, the word there I think should be happiness, but one feels happiness. For one feeling happiness, the mind becomes concentrated. This is called the noble disciple who dwells in balance amidst the unbalanced, who dwells unafflicted amidst the afflicted. As one who has entered the stream to the Dhamma, he recollects the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and so on. And then he finishes in another place by saying about joy and happiness, the mind that is happy becomes concentrated. Sukhino cittaṃ samādhīyati. Once again, I think that's worth thinking about. Sometimes meditation is seen as a constant struggle. This statement makes it clear that it's easier to become concentrated when you are at ease. Sukhino cittaṃ samādhīyati. The mind that is happy becomes concentrated. So these are some of the comments that I have to make about the recollections. And one last thing. If you read through the suttas where the Buddha is talking about meditation, there is only one place that I have been able to find where he talks about meditation, and in this case, the recollections. He talks about meditation as it relates to the lay community. So many of the other things he says about meditation certainly could be practiced by lay people. But this one, the recollections, is the only one where he specifically mentions it in relation to a lay Buddhist. And this is the statement, and you can look it up. Once again, if you go to Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, if you go to page 1564 and so on, you'll find this statement where he describes in detail the recollections to Mahānāma, and at the end of it he says, you should develop them while walking, standing, sitting or lying down, while living at home with your house full of children. Now, the fact that the Buddha would specifically mention this to a layperson, living at home with a spouse and children and a mortgage and what have you, reinforces for us the idea that this meditation is for everybody. And that may not be the case for other types of meditation. Okay, that's all I've got to say about the recollections. I hope some of that may have been of interest to you. And if there's anything anybody would like to ask, I'll do my best to answer any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you, dear Bhante. So now we've entered the Q&A part of our program. For those with a question, you can just raise your hand using the hand-raising function of Zoom, and then I will ask you to unmute yourself. And for those who don't know how to do that, just wave at the screen, and if I can see you, I'll point you out. Okay, choose me, you know. So Bhante, while we're waiting for a question, I have a question for you, which is what is the best way to practice this? Like, do we practice it every day? Do we set time aside or do we do it like just before our daily meditation, or do we do it like twice a month? Like, what is the best way? And if we have to choose like one or two, is there a one or two that is the best?
Okay, well, I'll just mention what I do. So I do a puja every night. And when I've finished, according to how I feel, and how I feel may be related to what I've done during the day or what I haven't done.
Mm-hmm.
And then I inevitably do either metta bhavana or I do the recollections. And which recollection I do, once again, determines how I feel at that particular time. Or I may notice that I haven't done this particular one or that particular one for a while. And so I do it. Mm. But some recollections are specially constructed, I suspect, to arouse positive feelings. So Silānussati, for example, etc. Other ones are more subdued feelings, like the recollection on death, for example, at least sometimes. And so I think it's good to balance all of them. Dispositionally, we may be more inclined to one than another, but I suspect that the Buddha thought very carefully about the whole ensemble of them. And so that's what I think. According to how you feel, and according to where you feel it's significant to do that particular one or pay more attention to that one. In the case of the recollection on death, of course, there are quite a lot of other contemplations on death that the Buddha recommended. Some of them simply can't be done today, so the cemetery meditations and what have you. But my experience has been, and here I'm talking about members of the Sangha, the monks that I have met. When I meet a monk who's really into the recollection on death, my feeling is that he's exactly the type of person who shouldn't be doing it. Whereas I come across somebody who said, oh, that's horrible, I'm not going to do it. They probably should at least do it sometimes. You understand what I mean?
Thank you. Yeah, so I myself do that every day, recollection on death.
Really, yeah.
Yes.
It can be very salutary, I'd have to say. I had this experience quite a long time ago now, but somebody did something to me really quite spiteful and nasty. And an experience like that, generally, you've got no problem about evoking negative feeling within yourself. Anyway, this sort of tormented me for some time. And then, I'm not sure how it, probably as a result of the meditation, I found myself thinking, one day he'll die. And that made me feel quite ashamed of myself of some of the things I had been hoping would happen to him. And that pretty much resolved it. That doesn't mean that I didn't know that what that person had done was really very unpleasant. It's just that I was still aware of it. But the intense negative feelings to strike back or hope that something awful would happen to that person, that was gone. Now, that wouldn't necessarily happen to everybody all of the time, but that was one experience that I had. Not recollecting my, or thinking about my demise, but somebody else's.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, so I do some version of that as well. If I have a friend or some loved one who have a difficulty with, I do that recollection, and immediately half the anger disappears, just like that in seconds, and then the other half, loving kindness, will just resolve it. So,
this just, yes, it just reminded me something that I might comment on too, is that those who are important to us, those who are close to us, recollecting their demise sometimes can be salutary also, because it makes you think they're not going to be here forever. I should make sure that I cultivate the relationship between us while I still can.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Ranjali has a question asked over text. The question is, Bhante, is there a book or article that we can read on these Anussatis in detail?
No. Gee, if
I
you
have a
put
book
all
idea
the
for you,
articles
Bhante.
and books on mindfulness, if you put all the articles and books on mindfulness, goodness me, it's going to take 500 years to read them all. Once again, I see a bit of an imbalance here, a lack of balance. I imagine that the Buddha taught different types of meditation. Well, he did teach different types of meditation because he was very conscious and aware that people are different. Some flourish using one, others less so. In fact, there's that statement where the Buddha says the faculties of individuals are different, and that's absolutely true. So, and I've come across people, this is rather sad, I've come across people who have meditated, they've been told that they've got to stop thoughts. And so they genuinely try. And of course, they end up giving up and usually give up meditation. As I always say, it's if the purpose of meditation was to stop thinking, well, it would be very easy. You just get your friend to hit you over the head with a baseball bat and you won't have any thoughts for at least 2 or 3 hours. So, but whatever it is, so some people, they're in this predicament because they think that mindfulness is the only type of meditation. Now, I'm not saying that mindfulness is not important. I think it's absolute, well, it's one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path, but it is not the only type of meditation taught by the Buddha. Explore the others. I don't know of any book on the subject. I'm not really aware of any article on the subject.
There is one article in your book all about Buddhism.
Around. Yeah, that's been out of print for quite some time, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, good. By the way, there was a master who asked me once, do you have thoughts? And I said, I think so. And Jin Yang has a question. Jin Yang, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bhante, and thank you, Brother Ming. A while ago, you were speaking about us living in times of peace, but in the past few days, I've been following the news, and of course, we know that India and Pakistan are, on the verge of a full escalation of war. And I was wondering, well, I go to Ladakh every year. It's very close to Kashmir, and so for the first time, I feel like, I'm close to warfare. If I do go back this summer. So I was wondering if there's anything from the sutta that you recommend us to look into for, at times of conflict, what should we recollect or practice?
Well, no, I don't know anywhere like this. So, I mean, there are lots of situations in life that spring up which the Buddha did not address. So what we do in cases like that, we use our imagination. So I think in a case like that, and as you know, there's at least 3 or 4 really serious armed conflicts going on now in South Sudan. For some reason or other, the people are bored with that, and news agencies don't cover it anymore. And there's Ukraine and Gaza and what have you. And this new one that's just broken out in India. And I'm just going to tell you what I think. I used to often follow such world events, and you find yourself becoming really distressed, worried, drained of energy and feeling completely helpless. And the reality is you are. There's nothing you can do about it. These are situations far beyond our control. You know, if only we could. So I think to use this as an opportunity, look, that's samsara. Fix this one, another one will break out. Solve that one just in time for another one over there. It just goes on and on and on. So ultimately, it's to fix it for yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some things that you can do. So, for example, you could go and work in an aid organization or make a donation for something like that. It doesn't mean that you can't do that. You can. And sometimes that makes some difference, at least to a few people. But let's be realistic. Ultimately, it's not. I remember when it looked like the Gulf War was about to start, and there was a news item I remember seeing. It just sticks in my mind. A woman in some airport in the United States going around giving roses to people. That's better than nothing, I suppose. But, well, I mean, so sometimes you even get the feeling that all of this sort of thing is just so that I don't have to look at myself. Ultimately, from a Buddhist perspective, these things are beyond our control. Spend more time trying to deal with how you feel about it, because there's very little that you can do. But as I said, having done that, there are some things that you can do that can make a difference. And if you do get absorbed and obsessed in these things, you only have to see this Palestinian business, how angry people are. Is this helping? It's not helping very much either. And it's certainly not helping them. Anger, desire to strike back, hating other people because of it. And this is samsara, man. This is samsara. That's what I think about that. So it's not a message everybody wants to hear, but reality really doesn't take much account of our feelings.
Thank you, Bhante.
Where are you speaking from?
I'm speaking from Santa Barbara in California.
I see.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
so not too far away from Brother Ming.
Santa Barbara is paradise, by the way.
Is
For those
it?
who been there. Yeah, it's like everything there is perfect.
Yeah,
Devaloka, is it?
it is.
Right, anything else, anybody?
Well, while we're waiting, I want to follow up on Jin Young's question, Bhante, which is, what do you think of the approach by Mahatma Gandhi, and to some degree followed by Father Desmond Tutu?
Well, I was a great fan of Gandhi a year or two before I became a monk, because the Vietnam War was going on then.
I remember
And I
you
became a
saying
great
that you
fan
were,
of him.
you were very angry when you were a kid.
Well, I wasn't angry about those sorts of things. I was just angry at everything. But I read Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography. I read his letters that he wrote to Leon Tolstoy and Tolstoy's replies to them. I read 2 or 3 autobiographies about him, mainly about his time in South Africa, and I became a real fan of him. And I remain so. But I think he was very fortunate that his opponents were basically relatively civilized people. That is, the British.
True.
He put him in jail and did all sorts of things. In another circumstances, he'd just had a bullet in the head, and that would be the end of it. So that's what I think. There are some situations where the problem on the ground is quite different. If he'd have been up against the Nazis, it would have been the end of him straight away. So, but the idea of restraining from hitting back violently for as long as possible, I think that that's a noble thing. In a sense, I think a better example, or no, that maybe is not the right word. Another example is Dr. Martin Luther King. So he was against some pretty nasty people, and they certainly were prepared to kill people for it. And he persevered, and he emerged as a beacon. And I think he had more sort of, he had less sort of personal hang-ups than Gandhi. Gandhi was against vaccinations, he was against modern dairies, he was against trains, despite the fact that he traveled in trains. And he was a very shrewd political maneuverer too. He had to be, and that's okay. Whereas Martin Luther King was dealing with some very, very nasty people and really ugly situations, and yet he persevered. And although he didn't live to see it, he brought about some really important changes, not only in the immediate situation, but in how people thought for decades later. That's the sort of things that he and American blacks were subjected to were really horrible. I think very, very few people now, except a few nuts, would think anything other than the people he was against, and the ideas he was fighting against are just not acceptable, at least in most Western societies nowadays. And for that, I think he was a very important person.
Yes, his moral courage survived him, and that changed America.
I think one of Gandhi's greatest virtues was he was courageous. There's no doubt about that. I mean, not that the British, but for his fellow Indians in 47, when he went through the villages and towns in West Bengal. Man, he was definitely, it was extremely dangerous for him, and yet he was prepared to risk it. And so in that sense, he was a very courageous man, and certainly Martin Luther King was too. Wow.
That's true.
You've got to admire people who put their life on the line for noble ideas that they think are worth fighting for.
Yes.
But going back to Gandhi, because I know a lot about Gandhi. As I said, there's a wonderful story that once somebody came to him, a mother, and said, "Look, my son has become addicted to sugar. He's eating sugar all of the time. It's bad for his teeth and his health. Will you speak to him?" And he said, "Yeah. Look, come back in a month." So you know the story?
Yes, I know the story. Yes, but please, yes. Please continue.
And he said, "Bring the kid. I'll tell him to stop eating sugar." So he said that. And then the mother, "What the hell did you wait for a month?" "I had to stop eating sugar first."
That's right. Yes. So if I ever become a guru, please don't ask me the same question. I love my sugar.
The other wonderful one is,
Mr.
Gandhi, what do you think about Mr. Gandhi, what do you think about Western civilization? He said, "I think it would be a very good idea."
Yes. So we have last two questions for you, Bhante, over chat. This one from Doris. Doris asks, okay, so most of the time during meditation, mindfulness and breathing meditation, I have difficulty going into the zone. Thus, after 10 or 20, going into the zone. The zone. Okay, and then, so after 10 or 20 minutes, I conclude as a failed session and I stop meditating. So a minority of the time, 1 or 10 times, I enjoy the successful session of 1 hour relaxation and great effect in meditation. So am I right to stop during unsuccessful attempts, or should I persevere?
Oh, that's a good practical question. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I do.
Mm.
When I have that situation, I don't give up. I continue and try to be as realistic as possible. Am I just, it's just not working today? In which case, I give up or I stop. But I don't stop immediately. I persist. And I think the value of that is that gradually you still have that problem, but it's like doing exercises.
Mm.
If you stop every time lifting weights or whatever, if you stop every time that it's a little bit uncomfortable, you're never going to progress. You see what I mean?
Yes.
But perhaps labeling it as a failure may not be a good idea. Perhaps sort of considering it, well, that's the yatha bhuta jnana dassana. That's the situation as it is now.
Mm.
Okay.
Right.
I'd like to be in control of everything. I'd like to have a magic wand and have it wonderful every time. It's not the case.
Mm.
So I persevere for a while, and then if I try to be as realistic as possible, I don't stop because I'm lazy or I just want to cop out. I'm stopping because it's not the time for that.
Mm.
That's what I do.
So one way I can think about it is if I can get into a place of peace in my meditation, I enjoy the peace. And if I cannot, then I enjoy the awareness of the non-peace.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Mm. So Bhante, we have two questions, one from Brandy, which I'll read out, and then after that, Louis will have the last question. So Brandy's question is, do you think some of the conflicts we're seeing in the world is because so many people are weaponizing their emotions and projecting those emotions onto others rather than doing the work to face them in themselves?
Well, I don't know that I can answer that, but looking at, moving from the international scene to, say, conflicts between people, between individuals, well, there seems to be a wide range of things. Buddhism tends to classify it as greed, hatred, and delusion. I think that's pretty good, actually. But each of those things, lobha, moha, and dosa, they have different modalities. So delusion can be, overestimating yourself, thinking that you're just wonderful, and therefore you despise others. So there are many different modalities to that. But I think the solution is not being able to pinpoint what it is, but trying to look at what can be done before a situation breaks out. So we all know about, say, the Second World War. If people had had the courage to do something early on, it's quite possible that the Second World War would not have broken out. So in this case, it was delusion, cowardice, not wanting to rock the boat, hoping that if we give him something, maybe he'll stop, and all of which. So looking back on that situation, if something had been done beforehand, and I think that this is often the case in human conflicts, and that not always. But speak to somebody at the UN. I'm not the right person to ask about that.
And with that, Louis have the last question. Where are you, Louis? Did we miss? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to go into the.
Louis.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
Hi there. Thanks for taking the question. I know I need to leave time for closing. It took a few minutes for my question to sort of crystallize for me, but try to be brief here. So it seems to me, Bhante, that there's a meaning. I can't help but sort of recognize a meaningful overlap between the 10 parami and this list of Anussati recollections. And for example, generosity and virtue appear in both lists. I understand the parami as aspirational virtues that we aim to cultivate over time, while it seems the Anussati serve as more as recollections of concrete expressions of many of those same qualities in our lives. So I was just wondering, when that occurred to me, I wonder if you see any particular value in sort of intentionally contemplating these two lists together in that way, sort of using the Anussati as a way to enliven the aspirations of the parami, for example, and also just, is there any basis for this kind of integrated reflection on these two lists, like within the canon or commentaries or in sort of established monastic practice? I'm just curious about that. So thank you.
Well, that's a very thoughtful question. I can't say I'd thought of it like that before, but you're quite correct, yes. Well, I think there are so many other things too, quite apart from the paramis, but one could certainly do that. And there's something to be said for aspiration. But I've written a little bit about where the Buddha talks about making an aspiration. The English word is very interesting. You know what it means? It means to breathe out.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. But yeah, I think that there is, but there are quite a lot of other things in the Dhamma that you can integrate into the recollections, and the other way around, the recollections can be integrated into them. As for any canonical connection between them, there isn't any, as you probably know that the recollections are quite a late addition, probably influenced by early Mahayana, I think. So you get them mentioned very frequently in the commentaries to the Jatakas. But that's a good question that you ask, is, you know, can we integrate other things into the Dhamma? And the question is, the answer is absolutely. The thing that comes to mind for me on that issue is modern psychology. Are there aspects of modern psychology that can be used to help us to enhance meditation practice or understand it better? And the answer is absolutely. So, and perhaps there are aspects of other religions that we can help to draw out deeper meanings in some aspects of Dhammas. One thing I talk about occasionally is what you can call maybe metta with its sleeves rolled up. I think one of the highlights of Christian ethics is the idea of not just thinking nice thoughts about people, but getting off your meditation cushion and absolutely doing something to help them. You get that in the Dhamma, but it's not emphasized very much. And I think it's noticeably lacking in Buddhist practice, at least in traditional countries. So can we learn from other faiths? Yeah, I think so. Well, we have to be careful that it doesn't become copying or what do you call it when you mix one thing with another? What's the word?
Confession.
Doesn't come. What's that?
Alloy?
No. There's
Confession.
It doesn't matter. As long as you.
Bastardization.
No, well.
Almost.
This is the problem nowadays. My memory is getting so bad. But anyway, yes, you can certainly integrate other things into the Dhamma. And if it's something from the Buddhist tradition, say from the Mahayana tradition, that shouldn't be too difficult. That's what I think. But that's a very good question. I think, thank you for suggesting that. I might give some thought to that in the next few days. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Louis. Thank you, Bhante. Bhante, as closing, can I invite you to close with a dedication and maybe a blessing for all of us?
Sometimes I like to finish a talk by chanting the first two verses from the Dhammapada. Mm-hmm. I particularly like them because they they pertain to something extremely important, and that is the idea that it's looking within, particularly at the mind and its contents. That is absolutely fundamental to Buddhism, and that's what the first two verses in the Dhammapada reinforce. So I'll just chant those two verses as a blessing to us all. Mano pubbang madam mano seta mano maya manasati padutena Vasati vaha karoti va tatunang dukkhaman veti chankang vahavatu padang manupumbang madamma manuseta manomaya Manasati pasanena basati vaha karoti va tatunang sukhaman veti chaya va anapayani tatunang sukhaman veti Jaya Varanapayani Tatunang Sukhaman Veti Jaya Varanapayani. Okay, thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu. Let's all bow to the Master. Thank you, dear Bhante. So, as a reminder, this recording will be uploaded. Okay, this recording will be uploaded to Buddhism.net, the YouTube channel. Subscribe and share with your friends. Bhante is retired, so and no longer attached to any organization. So, for those who want to practice dana in gratitude to Bhante, please make a donation to any charity, and maybe just remember Bhante while you're doing that. So, this is Dhammānussati. And also check out Bhante's new book, Footprints in the Dust.
All right.
Available now also in Chinese. Yes.
You can get it from, it's on Amazon, and you can get it from Pariyati.
And where books are sold.
It's a very good book. I know, I wrote it.
Yes. Yes, it is a very good book. I know, I read it. And then we take a break for 1 week, and in 2 weeks' time, one of the greatest Western Zen masters alive, Roshi Zone Halifax, will be here to talk about the topics we touched on today, which is activism and the Bodhisattva attitude. So sign up and join us. And friends, thank you all for being here.